Vanessa, you've been really involved in establishing a working disabled parking permit in Whangarei, which sounds like a really new and innovative initiative. Could you tell us about that, please?
Correct. That came about because I was lucky enough to spend some of my working career in London, and as anybody will know if they've ever been to London, parking is of a premium. You can pay hundreds of pounds in order to be able to park close to where you want to be. And so parking is a real issue over there, and yet the councils have recognised that it is, and there are enough barriers for disabled people to go and get employment without the location of that employment being a further barrier. Now the public transport system in London is pretty good as well, but it's still not good enough in terms of the disabled community, and there are huge steps towards improving that. But what they have done is they've said to the disabled community, if you want to park close to where you work, apply to our council and we'll consider that request, and then providing you meet the criteria, which are that you're working and that you are wanting to be able to park close because of a disability, and you meet the disability criteria in terms of walking ability, then they grant you a permit. And the permit that I was granted allowed me to walk literally 10 metres and I was inside my place of work, which is almost unheard of in London. So I worked under that scheme, and that enabled me to stay in London longer than I had anticipated, because I was experiencing such difficulty with accessing my first place of employment that I'd pretty much made up my mind that London just wasn't going to work and I'd have to leave. So having that lifeline thrown to me meant that I stayed and worked in London for a further 2 years, and it was just unbelievable. And I came back to New Zealand and I worked in Auckland for a while, and in Auckland I had the same parking problems that I'd originally had in London. And I sat there and I thought, well, isn't it crazy that in London with 12 million people, they can introduce a parking scheme for disabled people and make it work, and yet we haven't got anything in New Zealand that comes close to this. And so I didn't really get it started in Auckland, but when I came through to Whangarei, I didn't anticipate that parking outside my place of work would be a problem. You tend to think of Whangarei being much smaller and everything being accessible. But the reality is that parking within the Whangarei city area is becoming just as hard to access, and people are being pushed further and further out to the fringes. Now if you're able-bodied, that isn't really a problem. You just need to lose the lazy streak in you and put your walking shoes on and walk a little bit further. But if you're disabled, it is just such a huge barrier, especially in the winter months when it's raining, if you're having to deal with things like crutches that slip and wheelchairs unloading and reloading from cars in the bucketing rain. So I thought, well, if it can work in London, it can work here. Let's go and see what the council think of this idea. So I think it took a little while to get council to understand what the scheme operated like, because obviously, unlike me, they hadn't had the physical experience of seeing it in action. But it's a pretty simple concept. Take out the parking meter running out and filling a metre every 5 minutes angle, and just say to somebody, park all day there, right outside where you work. And really, in terms of loss of revenue to council, there's very little. But from the positive side, you've got disabled people entering into the workforce who might otherwise not be able to, or staying in the workforce when they might otherwise have to leave it because of the location. I don't want my job opportunities to be limited by the place in which I choose to work. I'm qualified to work as a legal executive in any law firm in New Zealand. Why should my qualification to do that be then diminished by my ability to be able to get into that place of work? So that's why I went and fought for it. Whangarei District Council listened. The Mayor, Pamela Peters, was particularly supportive in the early stages, and it was lovely to see how the council got behind the idea and put it into place fairly quickly. We passed a bylaw back in December, and by June this year the scheme's up and running, and at last count we've had 4 people apply for the permit and been granted. And more interestingly, the Minister of Disabled Affairs has taken up the idea as well. She has encouraged councils throughout the country to take up the scheme and follow Whangarei Council's example. That has been endorsed from the feedback we're getting from the council staff, that they're being inundated with requests from all over the country saying, how do you run the scheme? What do we do? How do we get it to work? and I've prepared a seminar type paper for distribution to people who are wanting to get that moving in their own regions, so that we can see it come New Zealand wide.
And it's such a fabulous initiative because it really recognises the value disabled people add to Whangarei through our working. Thank you, Vanessa, that's fabulous. That's Tiaho Trust, for disabled, by disabled.